I'll call on the Honorable Minister of Natural Resources, the Honorable Vickram Bharrat, to make his presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to start my presentation by reading a paragraph from a letter that was published today in the Times newspaper. You should listen to the rebuttal to some of your comments, Honorable Member Patterson, because it was a lot of misrepresentation of the facts and what the APNU AFC actually did. But Mr. Speaker, permit me to start by reading the first paragraph of a letter that was published in today's Times newspaper that summarizes the position of the APNU AFC and their comments on budget 2022. And I quote, Mr. Speaker, "Whatever the real or imagined ills of our economy or plight of the poor are, the APNU AFC, whether in government or as the political opposition, lack the intellectual fortitude, integrity, and moral standing to chastise budget 2022 as was presented by the Honorable Minister, Dr. Ashni Kumar Singh." Mr. Speaker, when the APNU AFC was in government, we said that they locked themselves in a bubble, that they are functioning in a bubble. They've isolated themselves from the people and the realities of the situation on the ground. And you would have expected this to change after the electorates burst that bubble. Unfortunately, in opposition, they're still exhibiting the same kind of behavior of being stuck in that bubble and are not in tune with what the reality is, are not in tune with the plight of our people in the country, and are not in tune as to where Guyana is going, as to what budget 2022 will do for our economy and the transformation of the lives of our people. That is what they would have not realized, Mr. Speaker. And we have heard so many comments and so many fancy descriptions of budget 2022 by members of the APNU AFC. We have heard that budget 2022 is a long waste of time. We have heard that it is a joke. We have heard that it is disrespectful. But Mr. Speaker, how can budget 2022 be disrespectful when budget 2022 is offering $30,000 to every single school child in this country, regardless whether they're from Oriala, whether they're from Itika, whether they're from the Rupununi, whether they're from the quarantine course? Every single school child will get $30,000, Mr. Speaker. Government and private schools. Mr. Speaker, we have heard so many comments from speakers on the opposition benches. We heard the Honorable MP from Region 5 saying that the roads in number 28 and Itika and Belladrum and Seafield and Hope Town are in terrible conditions. Mr. Speaker, that is a result of the APNU AFC failing their supporters. They failed their supporters, Mr. Speaker. This same APNU AFC government opposition, Mr. Speaker, they were in government from 2015 to 2020. From 2015 to 2020, even though they were illegally squatting in government, they failed their supporters in Region 5. Because if you come to the National Assembly and say that the roads in Hopetown and the roads in Ithaca and the roads in Belgium are in terrible state, what did you do for your supporters in those 5 years? And even if you did something, it was substandard work. How can it be in a deplorable state so quickly? It means that you did shoddy work in your support base. Shoddy work in your support base, Mr. Speaker. So to come to the National Assembly, we must actually think before we make certain comments. Mr. Speaker, we heard the other MP from Region 5 using the deaths of innocent people to gain cheap political points in this August House. Mr. Speaker, those are comments that should never ever be used. We should not use the deaths of people to gain political points in the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, we heard the Honorable MP from Mocha, saying that there is nothing in this budget for the working class people. There is nothing in this budget for the women in this country. There is nothing in this budget for the people of Mocha. Mr. Speaker, with all due respect to the honorable member and her children, she did mention that she has 5 children. Mr. Speaker, that honorable member will be collecting $150,000 because of the PPP civic government. Because of the PPP civic government. An increase, Mr. Speaker, an increase of $55,000 from a few months ago. Last year she collected $95,000. And in 2022, she will collect $150,000, Mr. Speaker. $150,000. And what did she receive when her government was in power? Nothing, Mr. Speaker. Nothing, Mr. Speaker. Nothing. Mr. Speaker, it pains you. It pains you to sit and listen to an individual who was a former Minister of Education, I'm not sure if she's still a member of Parliament or not, who was a former Minister of Education coming to this House and say that the 5B program is better than the cash grant. Mr. Speaker, she is speaking to sensible people. Guyanese are sensible people. If you have 30 buses by 30 students, how much can you transport on a given day? How much can you transport on a given day? And then the honorable member is speaking about handouts. Like if the bicycle and the slippers and the boots and the breakfast wasn't handouts. Mr. Speaker, and I'm happy that the honorable member, Mr. Ramjitan, is here. And awake, fully awake. Because, Mr. Speaker, the honorable member, Mr. Ramjitan, seems to have an obsession with taxes. There is some kind of obsession with Mr. Ramjitan, the honorable member, and taxes and sugar workers. Taxes and sugar workers. When he was in government, and now when he's in opposition, there is still the same obsession with taxing the poor people. And yet they come and say, we are taking disposable income away from people. We got to be sure of what we are saying. We can't be contradicting each other and being all over the place. Because one member is saying that we are taking away disposable income. The other member is saying that we need to tax the population. We need to ensure that we tax them and tax them more. So there got to be some kind of synergy. They got to be sure of what they really want, Mr. Speaker. It's the same attitude. It is the same attitude that have them in the opposition benches today. It is the same attitude that have them in the opposition benches today. And their dislike for sugar workers. And the honorable member, being a Barbician himself, would think that he loves sugar workers. But this is the very member that every single time we make allocation for Gaisuku, he has a problem. What is the problem with Gaisuku and sugar workers and this honorable member? Because they voted you out. Because they voted you out, honorable member. They put you back in the opposition benches where you will stay for a very long time. Because obviously there is no leadership, there is no sense of direction, there is even no opposition leader. Mr. Speaker, there is this obsession. The honorable member, Mr. Speaker, I'll get to that. I have 35 minutes. Mr. Speaker, there's an article, I think it was Kaicho News, quoting the honorable member to say, Guyana on path of resource course. Ramjitan says budget 2022 destroying the non-oil sectors. It is obvious, Mr. Speaker, that the honorable member did not listen to when Minister Ashini was reading the budget, or he did not take the time to read it properly. Or he was probably not awake when the government members were explaining all the measures in the budget, Mr. Speaker. How can you actually say that budget 2022 is killing the non-oil sectors? When the money from the natural resource fund that flowed into the budget is to incentivize the very non-oil sector, like sugar, honorable member, like fishing, honorable member, like logging, like mining, like tourism, like manufacturing. You examine the budget, Mr. Speaker. If you examine the budget, Mr. Speaker, you will see that the money from the Natural Resources Fund is flowing into those sectors. It is flowing into agriculture. It is flowing into health. It is flowing into education. It is flowing into tourism and manufacturing. It is flowing into our security. That is what it is being used for, Mr. Speaker. So when they come to the National Assembly and say, oh, the PPP is wasting the oil money, and there is no evidence of how the oil money will be spent, Mr. Speaker, we are saying to the people of Guyana, that is how the money will be spent in 2022, on education, on health, on agriculture, on tourism, on security, on training our young people, and building back our sugar industry. That is where the money will be spent, Mr. Speaker. Because majority of our Guyanese brothers and sisters are employed in those sectors. Not in the oil and gas sector, they are employed in those sectors. And that is why we are committed as a government to ensure that we continue to grow the non-oil sector. Because the non-oil sector are important in terms of job opportunities. And that is why we brought to the National Assembly the local content bill, which is a legislation now. It is to ensure that those very sectors benefit from the oil and gas sector. That is the purpose of the local content legislation, Mr. Speaker. The main purpose of the local content legislation is to ensure that the other sectors benefit. That tourism benefit, that agriculture benefit, that the training by education allow our people to enjoy the opportunities that are presenting itself in the oil and gas sector. So, Mr. Speaker, it pains you to listen for the last 3 days to people who should have known better come in and make these remarks. Mr. Speaker, I have not heard on this budget debate what we should have heard from the opposition. Should have been recommendations. Should have been, what do you think we should put into the budget? And I want to accept, Mr. Speaker, that there is no budget in this world, in any country in the world, that can solve all the ills of a country, that can solve all the problems in a country. No budget can do that. A one-year budget cycle cannot solve all the problems. And we know and we accept that budget 2022 even though we know that it is the best budget ever presented in the history of this country, that it will not solve all our problems. We will come again in 2023 and 2024 until 2030 and 2040. We will keep coming in order to make the lives of people in this country better. Mr. Speaker, one of my colleagues reminded me this morning that Norway is seen as a model oil and gas country. And everybody wants to model their framework, their management architecture framework of Norway. But Mr. Speaker, Norway found oil a long time ago. A long time ago, Mr. Speaker. Guyana found oil in 2015. In 2015, Mr. Speaker. Look at their infrastructure in those countries. How did they build that infrastructure? It is the oil proceeds that we use to build the infrastructure in that country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and then there is this usual talk. I don't want to touch on the many comments that we had on racism and ethnicity and one group. Mr. Speaker, I'm not a person to touch on things like that. But it pains me to have people who are elected leaders coming to this National Assembly and saying that the PUP is only doing things for one section of the population. It pains me, Mr. Speaker, because it is not true. It is not true. Is it that only one set of children will get a cash grant? Is it only one set of people will go to the 6 new hospitals that we are going to build?
Carefully. Listen.
Mr. Speaker, is it one set of people that will benefit from the local content legislation? Mr. Speaker, all Guyana will benefit. All Guyana will benefit. And there is this perception, and I wanted to say this a long time. There is this perception by the APNU AFC that it is only one ethnic group that works at Gaisuku. But that is a figment of the imagination, Mr. Speaker. If you look at the workforce in Gaisuku, it is very diverse. It is very diverse. Sugar workers is not one race only. Every Guyanese of all races work with Gaisuku. But there is this perception in their heads that only one set of people work with Gaisuku, and that is why the PUP is putting money in Gaisuku. Mr. Speaker, they need to go and check the order lines. They need to go and check the order lines. It is Guyanese of all walks of life that works with Gaisuku, and that are sugar workers. And that is why we are building back sugar, because it is benefiting Guyana and Guyanese, and not one section of the population. So it pains me to hear elected leaders coming to this house and talking about open racism. Mr. Speaker, I thought we gone past that those days. You don't use it. You don't use it to gain. You don't use that to gain political points in these days, Mr. Speaker. The days for that is long gone. The days for that is long gone. Mr. Speaker, and then the talks of corruption. There are so many talks of corruption. And the honorable member that spoke before me mentioned a few things. And one such claim or allegation of corruption is some drug bond story, Mr. Speaker. Some GPC drug bond story. But why the honorable member did not talk about the Sussex Street drugs bond? The bottom house drug bond that we were paying $14 million a month for, that we were storing condoms and lubricants. Because I can remember on that night when a team of parliamentarians went to check, including the Honorable Bishop Edghill. And that is what they found. That is what they found. A bottom house that was rented from a party supporter. A party supporter, but you don't say that. You don't say that. And he was given an advance in rent, almost a whole year advance in rent, so that he can buy the same building. so that he can purchase the same building with the people money. The people money. That is corruption. That is corruption. The members spoke so glowingly about oil and gas. But the APNU AFC, Mr. Speaker, committed probably the worst crime against Guyanese people in history. I think this is even worse than Jim Jones, the PSC. That's the worst crime against Guyana and Guyanese. And then you come to the National Assembly and you talk about oil and gas so glowingly. Mr. Speaker, we discovered oil and gas in 2015. The APNU AFC took office, I think, 5 or 7 days after that. After that, when we took over in August 2020, the oil and gas, it was floating. It was floating, Mr. Speaker. I say that because there was no proper framework, management model framework to manage the oil and gas sector. Nothing at all, other than a one-man show. Other than a one-man show and the management of the sector moving from ministry to ministry. That is what we had. We had no local content legislation in place. We brought that to the National Assembly so that people can benefit from the sector. Mr. Speaker, talking about corruption again, the honorable member did not mention a word about the 18 million bonus. No, we have to remind people. We have to keep reminding people that you collected 18 million US dollars as signing bonus, and you never tell the people of Guyana that you collected the money. We have to remind them. You don't like when we remind the people of your misdeeds and your corrupt active. You don't like when we remind the people of this country of that. That is the problem. But you collected. I was in the National Assembly at that time when a question was asked of the then Minister Jordan, and he said that he has no knowledge of this. Then when we asked again, he said that he thought it was a gift. 1.5 years after, then we heard that, oh, we received 18 million and it is in a special account, and that is to fight the case with Venezuela. Why didn't they tell us when you collected it? Why didn't they tell us when you collected it? So when you talk about corruption, Mr. Speaker, we got to talk about these things too. We got to talk about the demurrage costs. We got to talk, since we're talking oil and gas, we got to talk about the demurrage costs under the APNU AFC and under the PUP civic government. Mr. Speaker, when we took office, 3 lifts were completed. 3 lifts were completed, and we collected an invoice for 567,000 US dollars. Demurrage costs. Demurrage costs. We had to pay. We had to pay that. The people of Guyana had to pay that. Mr. Speaker, for the next 6 lifts under the PUP Civic Administration, the next 6 lifts, we have not paid more than $100,000 demurrage costs. And that is proper management. That is proper management, Mr. Speaker. And that is the fact. That is the fact. Mr. Speaker, there was another comment which I wish to address before I go more into oil and gas, and for us to speak about some of the opportunities that lies ahead, and that is of gold production. The Honorable Member Patterson mentioned it. I think the Honorable Member, Ms. Finance, also mentioned gold production. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Member mentioned that in 2016, we had the highest gold declaration in Guyana. And that is a fact. That is true. But if the Honorable Member understands how the industry works, she would have realized that it was because of the work of the PUP Civic Administration prior to 2015 resulted in the high declaration of gold. And worse to that, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Member boasts of a high declaration under the administration. Unfortunately, when we took over government, Mr. Speaker, it was not reflected in GGMC accounts. It was not reflected in GGMC accounts. It was not reflected in the figures of the Guyana Gold Board. That was in arrears. Mr. Speaker, in 2015 when we left, GGMC had over $20 billion. Over $20 billion. Just like the Forestry Commission had over $1 billion, GGMC had over $20 billion. When we took over, Mr. Speaker, GGMC had $7 billion. $7 billion, Mr. Speaker. 13 billion almost unaccounted for. And then yet, the members are boasting about high gold declaration during that period, but it did not translate into revenue going into GGMC or the Guyana Gold Board So, Mr. Speaker, there's a lot of questions to be asked, and that's the right question you asked. Where is it? Where is it? And we will, honorable member. Mr. Speaker, indeed, in 2021 we recorded a decline in gold declaration. But we cannot be divorced from reality all the time and not take into consideration the massive flooding that we had in 2021. And the flood, Mr. Speaker, is not an excuse. It happened. All of us are Guyanese. We knew what happened during the flooding. The honorable member is from a mining town. She would know, the honorable member would know that mining camps were floating away, that excavators were underwater, that AGM, the biggest pit in the country, is still being dewatered as we speak here, Mr. Speaker. So this is not excuse, Mr. Speaker. It's the reality of what happened. It is the reality of what happened in 2021. Added to that, Mr. Speaker, one of our big mining companies was hit with COVID. Added plus the death of their CEO. These are things that people need to take into consideration before we start to be critical. But the honorable member did not mention the massive increase in the diamond trade from 19,000 carats to 44,000 carats. The honorable member did not mention the massive increase in quarryable materials, stone and aggregates from 650,000 tons to 857,000 tons. The honorable member stopped short from mentioning that. She did not mention the increase from 600,000 tons of sand to 1.2 million tons of sand. Mr. Speaker, these are the increases that we would have had in 2021. And in the quarrying sector, we will continue to increase our production with the issuance of license to people who have the capacity and the resources to develop those operations. Mr. Speaker, I wish to speak substantively now on our oil and gas sector. Mr. Speaker, I also wish to welcome on behalf of the government of Guyana the announcement made by CGX in the quarantine block. I say that with some amount of satisfaction and pride, Mr. Speaker, because I'm a Borbisian too. And I know the difference that this will make to the people and the opportunities that will come to Borbis and the people of Borbis. Mr. Speaker, we have had now close to 30 discoveries in our oil and gas sector. Close to 30 discoveries in our oil and gas sector, Mr. Speaker. Very soon, as a matter of fact, weeks from now, our new FPSO Unity will start producing at 220,000 barrels of oil per day, taking our total to 340,000 barrels per day, Mr. Speaker. And our third FPSO Prosperity should be in Guyana by 2024, taking our production to 560,000 barrels per day. And Mr. Speaker, we are in the process of reviewing the field development plan for the fourth development, the Yellowtail development. And I want to say that we are not taking things lightly. As a government, we have already engaged 2 different sets of international consultants to ensure that they review the field development plan for Yellowtail and to ensure that when a license, once approved, is granted, that it brings additional benefits to the people of Guyana. And there are safeguards in the license to ensure that our environment is protected and to ensure that people actually benefit from the oil and gas sector, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Member Patterson spoke about the environmental hazards of oil and gas. But Mr. Speaker, the lease permit that was signed by the AP and UAFC government, there was no provision as to how Exxon should deal with produced water. Nothing. Nothing, Mr. Speaker. But the Honorable Member said that we are dumping water into the ocean. Mr. Speaker, we changed the lease permit and we upgraded the Payara permit to ensure that the water is treated to international standard before it is dumped. That it is treated to international standard and that the EPA will monitor this along with other agencies to ensure that the water is treated to international standard before it is dumped.
Honorable Minister, we want to treat you to the parliamentary standard, so we will have to get you 5 minutes to conclude.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask that my colleague be given 5 minutes to conclude his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Minister, you may continue to your conclusion in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will use some of my 5 minutes just to speak on the gas to energy project, which was also mentioned by the Honorable Member. Mr. Speaker, the government of Guyana decided that we will pursue with the gas to energy project because we see it as a project that will transform the landscape of our country, as a project that will reduce the cost of living of our people in this country, as a project that will bring significant opportunities and employment in this country. Mr. Speaker, this is a project that will raise the standard of living of our people. This single project. And we have always said, Mr. Speaker, that whenever we develop the oil and gas sector, it must benefit every single Guyanese. It must benefit every single Guyanese. And in the same way, the 126.7 billion is transferred to this budget, which we are scrutinizing right now. So this big hullabaloo, Mr. Speaker, about scrutiny of the oil money, that is what we're doing here. We are scrutinizing how that money will be spent. And next week, the opposition will be given the opportunities to ask questions, be it sensible or not. They will be given the opportunity to ask questions and to scrutinize the budget and how the oil money will be spent and who it will be spent on, Mr. Speaker. So when we talk about transparency and accountability, that is what we're doing. We made a pledge when we were campaigning that we will ensure that there is transparency and accountability, and that when the money is used, it will be used to benefit every single Guyanese. And that is why we budgeted over $20 billion for the gas to energy project. Because our biggest problem in this country, Mr. Speaker, is the cost of power generation and the reliability of the power generation as well too, Mr. Speaker. And in the context of climate change now, the cutting emission is important. And that is what the gas to energy project would deliver to Guyana and to Guyanese. It will reduce our electricity costs by 50%. We will have reliable electricity and we will have cleaner electricity. And we will have clean electricity, Mr. Speaker. Most important. Mr. Speaker, we have always had a problem in this country of us exporting raw materials. And we have always worked with industries, we have always encouraged industries, we have always put out incentives so that industries can go into value-added products. But Mr. Speaker, the gas to energy project is the game changer. It is the game changer. And it will ensure that our manufacturing sector is boosted. It will ensure that our industrial sector is boosted because you have cheap, reliable electricity, Mr. Speaker. And when we have local manufacturing, Mr. Speaker, we cannot discount the opportunities that will be presented to our local private sector, even though they accuse us of crafting a budget for the private sector. We cannot discount the opportunities of employment by our people. We cannot discount the opportunities that our people will get in purchasing cheaper quality goods and services, and also lowering our importation bill, which is important in saving foreign currency, Mr. Speaker, valuable foreign currency. Mr. Speaker, so we are going to move ahead, Mr. Speaker, with the gas energy project and the Wales development area, because that will benefit the lives of every single Guyanese, be it on the opposition side or any side. It will benefit every single Guyanese, Mr. Speaker. And we are not stopping there. That project will provide 250 megawatts net. Soon our consumption will be higher than that at the pace at which we are developing this country, Mr. Speaker. With the new housing schemes, with the new hotels, with the new industries, we will soon exhaust that capacity. And that is why we are venturing into the Milo Falls Hydro project to add another 165 megawatts to that, another 50 megawatts solar, and all the mini hydros that we're investing in, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this project will help all sectors, Mr. Speaker. And we ask, Mr. Speaker, that this project be supported by all Guyanese, because a project that will change the lives of all of us. Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank you, and I wish to commend Budget 2022 for passage in the National Assembly. Thank you.